The neon lights of QuickMart flickered against the midnight darkness as Trevor's BMW rolled into the empty Cedar Falls parking lot. His 8-year-old daughter Zoe slept peacefully in the back seat, her teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. Inside the convenience store, a woman with trembling hands counted crumpled bills while 2 massive figures lurked by her Honda outside. "Hey, Cassie!" one bellowed through the glass. "Don't even think about running!" When she stepped outside, the larger man grabbed her arm, yanking her toward their pickup truck. "Bitch, think you can escape? You know how much you owe the boss?" The other thug seized her hair, dragging her across the asphalt as she struggled and cried out. Trevor stepped from his car, his movements fluid and precise. "Back off, bastard! She's mine!" His hand shot out like lightning, gripping the first man's collar and slamming him to the ground. His right foot swept the second thug's legs, dropping him in one brutal second. The way Trevor moved, economical, lethal, professional, revealed something far more dangerous than a simple small-town mechanic. But who was Trevor Hayes, really? The 2 men lay sprawled on the asphalt, one clutching his bleeding nose, the other groaning and holding his ribs. Trevor stood between them and the woman called Cassie, his breathing steady, not even winded from the brief encounter. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, revealing eyes that had seen things most mechanics never would. Cassie stared at him with a mixture of shock and recognition, her green eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear, but not of him. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of highway traffic. "Who are you?" The larger thug struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose onto his torn leather jacket. "You're fucking dead, old man. You know who you just messed with?" But Trevor's voice carried an authority that made both men freeze in place, a tone that spoke of years giving orders that were never questioned. "I know exactly who I just dropped. Question is, do you want round 2 or do you want to walk away?" The 2 thugs exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Professional street fighters who made their living intimidating people, reduced to nothing in 30 seconds by a man who looked like he belonged behind a wrench, not in a fight. The smaller one spat blood onto the cracked pavement, his eyes never leaving Trevor's face. "This ain't over, Cassie. Boss don't forget debts." Trevor stepped forward slightly, and both men instinctively backed away, their bodies recognizing something their minds couldn't quite process. "Yeah, it is over," Trevor said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of finality that ended conversations. "If I see you near her again, next time won't be this gentle." The black pickup truck roared to life, tires squealing against asphalt as they sped away into the Oregon darkness. The acrid smell of burned rubber hung in the air like a question mark, mixing with the distant aroma of pine trees and the metallic taste of violence barely contained. Cassie remained frozen beside her Honda, her entire body trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. Trevor turned toward his BMW, where Zoe was beginning to stir in the back seat, her small hand rubbing sleepy eyes. "That wasn't normal," Cassie called after him, her voice stronger now but still shaky. "I've seen men handle trouble before. You moved like police, military, something." Trevor paused at his car door, his hand resting on the handle as he glanced back at her. "I fix cars," he said simply, but even he could hear how unconvincing it sounded. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, a reminder of the 3 years he'd spent burying his past beneath the mundane routine of small-town life. "Before you fixed cars, what did you do?" Cassie pressed, stepping closer despite everything that had just happened. There was something in her eyes now, a desperation that went deeper than fear of street thugs. Inside the BMW, Zoe's sleepy voice drifted through the partially open window. "Daddy? What's happening out there?" Trevor's entire body tensed at the sound, his protective instincts flaring like a match struck in darkness. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed, came down to keeping that innocent voice safe from the world he used to inhabit. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just helping someone," he replied, his tone immediately softening to the gentle cadence reserved only for her. "Is the lady okay?" Zoe asked, her 8-year-old concern cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Trevor looked at Cassie, who was watching the interaction between father and daughter, with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between longing and recognition. "Yeah, the lady's okay now," he answered, though he suspected that was far from the truth. As Trevor drove away, Cassie stood alone in the QuickMart parking lot, replaying those 30 seconds over and over in her mind. The way he'd moved, economical, precise, no wasted motion. The way he'd spoken, command-voiced, used to being obeyed without question. The way both thugs had immediately backed down after seeing him fight, their street-smart instincts recognizing a predator far more dangerous than themselves. Trevor Hayes wasn't just a mechanic. He wasn't even mostly a mechanic. 3 years in Cedar Falls had taught Trevor that routine was safety, that invisibility was survival. Every morning at 6:30 he woke Zoe with gentle nudges and whispered promises of pancakes. Every evening at 7, they sat down to dinner at the small table in their double-wide trailer, discussing her day at school while carefully avoiding any mention of the time before Oregon. No family photos decorated their walls. No memories existed before Zoe turned 5. No grandmother called on birthdays or holidays. The next morning at Miller's garage, Trevor found it impossible to concentrate on the engine rebuild that should have taken his full attention. Every unfamiliar car that passed on the street made him look up from his work. Every phone that rang in the office made his shoulders tense. Joe Miller, the 60-year-old garage owner who'd given Trevor a chance when he'd first arrived in Cedar Falls with nothing but a daughter and a dying truck, noticed the change immediately. "You're jumpy today," Joe observed over his morning coffee, steam rising from the chipped mug that had been his companion for over 20 years. His weathered hands, stained with decades of motor oil and honest work, wrapped around the ceramic like it might provide answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "Didn't sleep well," Trevor replied, but his eyes kept drifting to the front windows, scanning the street for vehicles that didn't belong. "Anything to do with the excitement at QuickMart last night?" Joe's voice carried the casual tone of someone who'd lived in a small town long enough to know that news traveled faster than gossip and twice as far. Trevor's wrench slipped, the sharp clang of metal against metal echoing through the garage bay like a gunshot. "How did you hear about that?" The question came out sharper than Trevor intended, carrying an edge that made Joe's eyebrows rise slightly. "Small town, son." "Word travels. Heard you handled a couple of troublemakers real professional-like." Joe leaned back against the workbench, his keen eyes studying Trevor's face with the intensity of a man who'd learned to read people through 30 years of running a business. Also heard you moved like someone with training. Real training. The unspoken question hung in the air between them, like exhaust fumes on a cold morning. At 11 o'clock, the Honda pulled into the garage parking lot, its engine coughing like an old man with too many cigarettes and not enough hope. Cassie stepped out, wearing faded jeans and an oversized sweater that couldn't quite hide the expensive leather boots or the professional manicure barely visible beneath chipped polish. In daylight, Trevor could see details he'd missed in the chaos of the previous night. The way she moved with conscious grace, the way her eyes automatically catalogued exits, the way her hands never strayed far from her purse. "Engine trouble," she said simply. But her voice carried undertones that suggested the trouble went far deeper than mechanical issues. Trevor popped the hood, immediately noticing modifications that made his blood run cold. Reinforced frame, run-flat tires, what looked suspiciously like armoring around the engine block, professional-grade communication equipment discreetly mounted behind the dashboard. This wasn't just any Honda. This was a tactical vehicle designed for someone who expected trouble. "This isn't a regular Honda," Trevor said, straightening slowly as pieces began falling into place in his mind. "What do you mean?" Cassie's voice carried just a hint of wariness, the tone of someone who'd answered too many questions from too many people who had no business asking. Professional modifications. Expensive ones. "Lady, I may fix cars now, but I know a tactical vehicle when I see one." Fear flashed across Cassie's features for just a moment before control returned, like clouds passing over the sun. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the lie sat uncomfortably on her tongue. Trevor wiped his hands on a shop rag, the familiar gesture buying him time to think. "Someone's after you. Someone serious enough that you armored your car and carry fake identification. Question is, are you running from the law or from criminals?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with the distant sounds of Cedar Falls going about its morning routine, school buses rumbling past, dogs barking at mailmen, the eternal rhythm of small-town life that Trevor had come to treasure. "Why would you assume either?" Cassie finally asked, but her voice lacked conviction. "Because I recognize the signs. And because last night those thugs knew your name, or the name you're using. This wasn't random." Joe Miller's footsteps approached from the office, his heavy work boots announcing his presence like a drum beat. Trevor glanced toward his boss, then back at Cassie, measuring risks and possibilities with the quick calculation of someone who'd made life-or-death decisions before. "How much for repairs?" Cassie asked, deflecting with practiced ease. $150, but I'd rather have an honest conversation." "About what?" The question came out too quickly, betraying nerves that professional training couldn't quite suppress. "About who's hunting you. Because after last night they're hunting me too." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, carrying weight that both of them understood. 3 years of careful invisibility, destroyed in one moment of doing the right thing. That evening at Cedar Falls Diner, Cassie sat in the back booth, her position chosen with tactical precision, clear view of all entrances, back to the wall, multiple exit routes mapped in her peripheral vision. The red vinyl seats were cracked with age, held together with duct tape that had seen better decades. The overhead lights cast everything in a warm, amber glow that should have been comforting, but somehow made the shadows deeper, more threatening. Trevor slid into the booth across from her, his movements deliberate and controlled. Up close, in better lighting, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from months or years of looking over shoulders and sleeping with one eye open. "You lied about your background," she said without preamble, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had grown cold while she waited. "So did you." Trevor's response was equally direct, cutting through any pretense of small talk. They were both too tired, too exposed for games. "Trevor Hayes, that's not your real name, is it?" Cassie leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The diner was nearly empty, but old habits died hard when survival was the only game that mattered. "Close enough." "What about Cassie Miller?" Trevor countered, his eyes never leaving her face. In the fluorescent lighting, he could see faint scars along her hairline, the kind that came from professional medical work, either healing or hiding evidence. "Also close enough," she admitted, then took a shaky breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. "Those men last night, they work for people who want me dead." The simple statement carried the weight of confession, years of running condensed into 8 words that explained everything and nothing. Trevor felt a cold recognition settling in his stomach, the familiar chill of understanding exactly what kind of trouble had found its way to Cedar Falls. Why? The question was barely a whisper, but it carried the force of someone who needed to know exactly how much danger his daughter might be in. "Because I saw something I shouldn't have. Testified about something I shouldn't have known." Cassie's voice dropped even lower, forcing Trevor to lean across the table to hear her. The diner's jukebox played something soft and melancholy, country music about lost loves and second chances that seemed cruelly appropriate. And now they want to clean up loose ends. Trevor felt his world tilt slightly, like standing on a boat in rough water. "Federal witness," he said, and it wasn't a question. The way she flinched at the words confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. "And you?" she asked in return. "Former cop. Military." The guess hit close enough to home that Trevor couldn't quite hide his reaction. "Does it matter?" he asked, but they both knew it did. "It does if we're both targets now. Because helping me last night connected you to my problems." Cassie's eyes darted towards the diner's windows, where the parking lot was visible under the harsh glare of sodium lights. "They'll run background checks, discover your identity is only 3 years old, realize you're hiding something too." The logical progression was as clear as it was terrifying. Trevor's careful construction of a new life unraveling because he couldn't walk away from someone in trouble. Trevor thought about Zoe sleeping safely in her bed, trusting that her father would keep the monsters away. 3 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and parent-teacher conferences, all threatened by 30 seconds of muscle memory and moral obligation. What kind of problems are we talking about? His voice remained steady, but his hands gripped the coffee cup hard enough to leave fingerprints in the ceramic. The kind that end with people disappearing permanently. Cassie's words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water, each one creating ripples that spread outward into implications neither of them wanted to consider. "They killed my daughter through negligence, destroyed my family, took my life." Her voice carried a hollow quality, like an echo in an empty room. "Tonight they'll want to finish what they started." Memory crashed over Trevor like a rogue wave, pulling him back to a Seattle courtroom 3 years ago. The Chen case. Judge's daughter. Kozlov crime family. Media blackout after the witness disappeared into protection. Christine Chen, he said quietly, and watched her face go completely white. You're Judge Robert Chen's daughter. You testified against the Kozlov organization. The recognition was mutual and immediate. Two pieces of the same puzzle finally clicking together. Detective Trevor Hayes, Christine whispered. Organized crime unit. Your investigation provided the evidence that made my testimony possible. They stared at each other across the diner table. Two people who'd helped destroy one of the most powerful crime families on the West Coast, now sitting in a small-town restaurant, wondering if they'd live to see morning. But Witsek said you were relocated, safe. Trevor began, but Christine's bitter laugh cut him off. They failed me. My daughter Emma died in their program 2 years ago. Car accident during transport to a new safe house. She was 6 years old. The words came out flat and emotionless, but Trevor could see the pain burning behind her eyes, like coals in a banked fire. Understanding hit Trevor like a physical blow. He knew that kind of loss, that specific variety of grief that rewrote everything you thought you knew about the world. So you left protection, he said, and it wasn't a question because he would have done the same thing. Came here to disappear, maybe die quietly. Christine nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the scarred Formica tabletop. But then those men found me. And you. She trailed off, looking at him with something that might have been regret or gratitude or both. I acted like a cop again. Professional response. Training. I thought I'd buried. Trevor finished the thought for her, understanding the weight of instincts that couldn't be unlearned, no matter how desperately you wanted to forget. Trevor's phone buzzed against the table, the vibration unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. The text message was from an unknown number, but the words made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Nice work last night, Detective. Let's discuss terms. Riverside Mill, midnight. Come alone, or the kid pays the price. His hands began to shake as he showed the message to Christine, watching her face cycle through recognition, fear, and something that looked suspiciously like resolve. It's a trap, she said quietly. But Trevor was already standing, his mind racing through tactical possibilities and terrible choices. Obviously, but they have a point. This ends tonight, one way or another. The diner suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The windows like eyes watching their every movement. Trevor, you can't... Christine started, but he cut her off with a look that carried 3 years of suppressed rage and parental terror. Can't what? Let them threaten my daughter? I spent 3 years running from what I used to be. Trevor threw money on the table, his movements sharp and decisive. I'm done running. The transformation was subtle, but complete. The gentle mechanic disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, someone who'd forgotten how to lose when his child was threatened. They'll kill you, Christine said, standing as well, her own training evident in how she positioned herself to watch both the entrance and the kitchen exit simultaneously. Maybe, but I won't go down easy. Trevor looked at her directly, his eyes carrying a question he didn't want to voice. Are you coming with me, or disappearing again? Christine stared at him for a long moment, weighing survival against something she'd thought was dead inside her. You want me to help you fight the Kozlov organization? Directly? Her voice carried disbelief, mixed with something that might have been hope. "I want to finish what we started 3 years ago," Trevor replied, his tone carrying the finality of a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't be swayed from it. The drive to make arrangements took them through Cedar Falls' sleeping streets, past houses where normal families lived normal lives, blissfully unaware that violence was about to visit their quiet community. Trevor's first stop was Joe Miller's house, a modest ranch-style home on Elm Street, where porch lights created pools of yellow warmth against the darkness. Joe answered the door in his bathrobe, took one look at Trevor's face, and asked no questions. "I need you to take Zoe to your cabin, tonight, until this is over." Trevor's words were clipped, efficient, carrying urgency that Joe recognized even without understanding its source. "How much trouble are we talking about?" Joe's question was reasonable, but Trevor's answer was anything but. The kind that ends tonight, one way or another. Joe studied his friend's face, seeing something there that made him nod without further questions. "She'll be safe," Joe promised, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and understood the weight of such promises. "Ridge Road cabin is off-grid, defensible, stocked for emergencies." Trevor felt the first moment of relief he'd experienced since seeing that text message, knowing that whatever happened at the mill, Zoe would be protected by someone he'd trusted completely. 20 minutes later, Trevor knelt beside Zoe's bed in their trailer, watching her sleep with the fierce protectiveness that only parents understood. Her face was peaceful, unmarked by the violence that was circling their lives like vultures. "Daddy?" she murmured as he gently shook her awake. "We're going on a camping adventure with Uncle Joe tonight, sweetheart." "Just for one night. Why can't I sleep at home?" Zoe asked, her 8-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of things adults tried to complicate. "Sometimes daddies have to handle grown-up problems, but I promise I'll see you tomorrow." The words tasted like a vow and a prayer combined, a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. "Promise?" Zoe's sleepy voice carried the absolute trust that children reserved for parents who'd never broken their word. Trevor looked at his daughter, 8 years old, innocent, everything worth fighting for, and made a promise that he'd die to keep. "Promise, sweetheart." As Joe's truck disappeared into the Oregon darkness with the most precious thing in his world, Trevor felt something cold and familiar settling over him like an old coat. Riverside Mill sat against the star-filled sky, like a monument to abandoned dreams, its skeletal remains casting long shadows across the river that had once powered its machinery. Trevor crouched in the tree line, with military-grade binoculars, counting heat signatures through the thermal scope Christine had produced from a hidden cache that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment longer than she'd admitted. 8 hostiles in the main building, 2 in each warehouse, Trevor reported through the tactical radio earpiece that felt familiar in his ear despite 3 years of disuse. Professional deployment. They're not taking any chances. The buildings were positioned with clear sight lines and overlapping fields of fire, exactly the kind of setup he'd expect from people who killed for a living. "Copy that." Christine's voice crackled through the radio from her position on the south perimeter. "I've got eyes on their vehicles." 3 SUVs, probably more backup than we can see. Her tone was steady, professional, the voice of someone who'd found her purpose again in the midst of chaos. "Remember, they expect negotiation. We give them war." Trevor had armed himself like a soldier going to his last battle, tactical vest, AR-15, sidearm, grenades, enough ammunition for a prolonged engagement. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about ending a threat to his daughter permanently. Phase 1 initiated, he whispered into the radio, watching as Christine moved like a ghost through the darkness towards the north warehouse. The explosion lit up the Oregon sky like a premature sunrise, the blast wave rattling windows in Cedar Falls 3 miles away. Propane tanks and demolition charges combined to create a fireball that could be seen from the highway, spectacular and terrifying and perfectly calculated to draw attention away from the main building. 6 heat signatures immediately moved toward the explosion, their tactical discipline overcome by human curiosity and the need to assess damage. Trevor smiled grimly as he slipped through the service entrance of the main building, his movements silent and precise. Inside, he found exactly what he'd expected. Sophisticated command center with computer banks, communication equipment, and surveillance photos covering every available surface. Photos of Zoe, hundreds of them, at school, at the playground, walking with him to the library. Surveillance dating back weeks, maybe months. Son of a bitch, Trevor muttered, his hands tightening on his weapon as the full scope of the violation became clear. They hadn't just found him. They'd been watching his daughter, mapping her routines, planning something that made his vision go red around the edges. Impressive work, Detective Hayes. The voice came from behind him, cultured and cold, carrying an accent that spoke of expensive education and expensive tastes. Trevor turned slowly, his weapon trained on the man who could only be Dmitry Kozlov. Early 30s, expensive suit, intelligent eyes that radiated the kind of hatred that burned cold and lasted forever. 2 bodyguards flanked him, professional killers who moved like dancers and thought like machines. "Where's my daughter?" Trevor's voice carried a parental fury that made even hardened criminals take notice. "Safe for now," Dmitry replied, gesturing toward a laptop screen that showed video feed of Zoe tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse interior. She was unharmed, but terrified, her eyes wide above the duct tape that covered her mouth. "Beautiful child. Reminds me of my own daughter." The past tense wasn't lost on Trevor, and understanding hit him like a physical blow. "You have children?" Trevor asked, though he already knew the answer from the pain he could see burning behind Dmitry's controlled facade. "Had." Past tense. Dmitry's voice turned deadly, carrying years of grief transformed into murderous intent. "Federal raid killed my wife and daughter during arrest warrant execution. Collateral damage, they called it." Trevor remembered that raid, remembered the small body under the white sheet, the investigation that followed, the way it had haunted his dreams for months afterward. "I'm sorry," Trevor said, and meant it, understanding how grief could twist into something dark and consuming. "Sorry doesn't resurrect dead children, Detective, but revenge provides some satisfaction." Dmitry's smile was cold enough to freeze blood, the expression of a man who'd found purpose in destruction. "What do you want?" Trevor asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Everything you took from me. My father rots in Supermax because of your investigation. My family is destroyed because of Christine Chen's testimony. My organization is scattered because you two decided to play hero." Dmitry's voice carried the weight of years of planning, of patience rewarded with opportunity for vengeance. "So kill me. Leave Christine and Zoe out of this. Oh no, death is too simple. I? Dimitri's laugh was genuinely amused, as if Trevor had told an particularly good joke. I want you to watch everything you love die slowly, starting with your precious daughter. The laptop screen showed movement in the warehouse, armed men positioning themselves around Zoe's chair, weapons ready, waiting for orders that would end an innocent life. Trevor's world narrowed to a single point of focus, all his training and experience condensing into one moment of crystalline clarity. Through the radio, he could hear gunfire as Christine engaged the security team at the warehouse complex, her voice calm and professional as she reported tactical positions and enemy movements. "Christine, they have Zoe. Warehouse B," he transmitted, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Copy, moving to intercept," came the immediate response, but Trevor knew it was already too late. Even with Christine's skills, even with surprise on their side, there were too many variables, too many ways for an 8-year-old girl to become collateral damage in a war she'd never asked to be part of. No, too dangerous. It's a trap. Then we spring the trap our way. Christine's voice carried determination that reminded Trevor why she'd been brave enough to testify against the Kozlov family in the first place. Through the radio, he heard the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the Oregon darkness as Christine engaged multiple hostiles with the precision of someone fighting for more than her own life. Dimitri was speaking again, his voice carrying the casual tone of a man discussing dinner plans rather than murder. "Your choice, detective. Try to save your daughter and fail spectacularly, or surrender now and give her a quick death." Trevor looked around the command center, taking in the banks of electronics, the communication gear, the structural supports of the old mill building that groaned and creaked with every gust of wind off the river. An idea formed in his mind, desperate and probably suicidal, but maybe crazy enough to work. "Counteroffer," Trevor said, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't feel. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate," Dimitri replied, but there was something in his eyes now, a flicker of curiosity about what the detective might have in mind. "Christine Chen is the most wanted federal witness in the country, worth more alive than dead." Trevor lied smoothly, falling back on skills he'd learned in dozens of interrogation rooms and hostage negotiations. Justice Department would pay millions for her return. He could see Dimitri considering the possibility, greed warring with vengeance in his calculating eyes. "Interesting. Continue." The response was exactly what Trevor had hoped for, Dimitri's criminal instincts recognizing a potentially profitable opportunity. "She's wounded, trapped in the warehouse complex. Help me extract her alive. We split the ransom money. Both of us get rich. Both disappear to non-extradition countries." Dimitri's expression showed he was weighing the offer, calculating profit margins against the satisfaction of revenge. "What about the child?" he asked, and Trevor forced himself to speak words that tasted like poison on his tongue. Collateral damage. Kids die in crossfire sometimes. The lie nearly choked him, but he needed Dimitri focused on Christine rather than immediate execution. Appealing offer, but I think I prefer the original plan. Dimitri drew his pistol with practiced ease, the movement smooth and professional. "Any last words before watching your daughter die?" Trevor smiled, the expression carrying none of the warmth that Zoe associated with her father's face. "Yeah. I lied about Christine being trapped." The sniper shot came through the window like the hand of God, precise and final, Dimitri's first bodyguard dropped immediately, the back of his head disappearing in a red mist that painted the wall behind him. The second shot followed less than a second later, dropping the other gunman before he could even raise his weapon. Christine's voice crackled through the radio, calm and professional. "Package secured. Zoe is safe." Relief flooded through Trevor like a dam bursting, washing away 3 years of careful control and leaving him gasping with the intensity of it. But Dimitri still held his pistol, now pointed directly at Trevor's chest, his face twisted with rage and the bitter disappointment of plans gone wrong. "Clever, but you're still going to die," he snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Maybe. But my daughter lives, that's enough." Trevor dove as Dimitri fired, the bullet shattering electronics and sending sparks cascading like deadly rain. Trevor rolled behind an overturned desk, drew his own weapon, and prepared for the final exchange that would determine whether he kept his promise to see Zoe tomorrow. The close-quarters battle was everything Trevor's training had prepared him for, and nothing like the sanitized scenarios of police academy exercises. Dimitri was younger, faster, driven by years of hatred and the desperate fury of a man with nothing left to lose. But Trevor had the rage of a father whose child had been threatened, and that made all the difference in the world. They grappled for weapon control, crashing into burning electronics that sent showers of sparks across their locked bodies. "This is for my family," Dimitri snarled, managing to land a vicious elbow strike to Trevor's ribs. "Your family destroyed itself." Trevor broke the grip, delivered his own devastating knee strike. "I just documented the crimes." The final moment came suddenly, as these things always did. Trevor managed to control Dimitri's weapon hand just as the younger man drew a backup knife with his free hand. But Trevor had been fighting for his life longer than Dimitri had been alive, and experience counted for everything in moments like these. "This is for Emma Chen," Trevor said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of justice too long delayed. "And Joe Miller, and every innocent person your family hurt." The single shot echoed through the burning mill like a judgment, final and irrevocable. Dmitri Kozlov's war ended in an abandoned building in Oregon, 3,000 miles from the empire his father had built and lost. Trevor keyed his radio with shaking hands, the adrenaline making his voice unsteady for the first time all night. "Christine, buildings compromised, structural fire spreading. Copy. Exfil Point Alpha," came the immediate response, but Trevor was already moving, grabbing hard drives and documentation that would end the entire Kozlov network permanently. The building groaned around him like a dying animal as he fought through smoke toward the exit, each step taking him closer to the life he'd chosen to build rather than the one he'd been forced to abandon. Outside, Christine waited with Zoe in her arms, both of them alive and whole and more precious than anything Trevor had ever seen. "Daddy!" Zoe cried, launching herself at him with the absolute trust that only children possessed. "You came back!" Trevor held his daughter tight enough to leave fingerprints on her sole, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering aroma of the teddy bear she'd refused to leave behind. "Always, sweetheart. Always," he whispered into her hair, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Christine approached slowly, her own eyes bright with tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the fighting. "It's finished?" she asked, and Trevor nodded, understanding that she meant more than just tonight's violence. "All of it. Dimitri's dead, organizations decapitated, evidence secured." Trevor looked at the woman who had fought beside him, who had chosen to risk everything for a child who wasn't even hers. "We're free." Behind them, Riverside Mill burned completely, taking with it the last physical reminder of the life they'd both tried to leave behind. Federal vehicles arrived as the mill collapsed in on itself, Marshal Johnson emerging from the lead car with the kind of timing that suggested he'd been watching the situation develop for longer than anyone had realized. "Detective Hayes, Miss Chen, impressive work," he said, his tone carrying professional appreciation mixed with something that might have been relief. "How did you know we were here?" Trevor asked, still holding Zoe close enough to feel her heartbeat against his chest. "We've been tracking the Kozlov network for months. Tonight ended a 3-year manhunt." Johnson's smile was genuine, carrying the satisfaction of a job finally completed. "Both of you are free to resume normal lives." Trevor looked at Christine, seeing his own questions reflected in her eyes. What constitutes normal for people like us? The question carried weight that went far beyond immediate circumstances, touching on futures they'd both stopped believing in. "Whatever you choose to make it," Johnson replied, his answer carrying the wisdom of someone who'd seen too many people try to rebuild their lives from wreckage. "I choose family," Trevor said without hesitation, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought. "Real family, here in Cedar Falls." He looked at Christine, seeing understanding pass between them like electricity. "Even after everything that's happened?" she asked, her voice carrying vulnerability that made her seem younger, more fragile than the woman who'd just helped him fight for their lives. "Especially after everything," Trevor replied, meaning it completely. 3 years of hiding, months of growing closer, one night of violence that had stripped away all pretenses and revealed what really mattered. "I choose family too," Christine said softly, and Trevor understood that she meant more than just philosophical agreement. Cedar Falls Medical Center at 4 in the morning was a study in fluorescent lighting and institutional quiet, the kind of place where time moved differently and every sound echoed with unnatural clarity. Trevor sat beside Zoe's bed watching her sleep, her small body dwarfed by hospital equipment that clicked and hummed with electronic vigilance. The doctors had pronounced her physically unharmed, but Trevor knew that some scars took longer to show themselves. "She's remarkable," Christine said from the doorway, her own minor injuries treated and bandaged. Smoke inhalation, cuts from broken glass, bruises that would fade but never quite disappear completely. "Most children would be catatonic after what she experienced. Zoe keeps asking about the brave lady who saved me." Her voice carried wonder at the resilience of children, their ability to find hope in the darkest circumstances. Dr. Patricia Kim appeared with the quiet efficiency that hospital staff perfected through years of dealing with trauma and its aftermath. "Your daughter is going to be fine, Mr. Has some nightmares, probably. Therapy would be beneficial. But children recover faster than adults expect." Her professional assessment carried comfort that Trevor desperately needed to hear. "What about Christine?" Zoe's sleepy voice drifted up from the hospital bed, her eyes opening just enough to focus on the woman standing in the doorway. "Is she okay too?" The question carried 8-year-old concern mixed with something deeper, an understanding that this person had become important in ways that went beyond a single night's drama. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Christine replied, moving closer to the bed with careful steps that spoke of exhaustion barely held in check. "Thanks to your daddy, we're all going to be fine." Trevor watched the interaction between the woman he was beginning to love and the daughter who meant everything to him, seeing possibilities that 3 years of hiding had taught him not to hope for. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and official statements, federal agents who asked careful questions and accepted careful answers. By the time the sun rose over Cedar Falls, painting the hospital walls gold and orange, they were free to go home, whatever home meant for people who'd just redefined their entire existence. "Joe Miller's funeral is Thursday," Trevor said as they walked through the hospital parking lot toward his BMW. The words carried weight that went beyond scheduling, acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. "He died protecting Zoe. That means something." Christine nodded, understanding the importance of honoring people who'd sacrificed everything for strangers' children. "He left the garage to me in his will," Trevor continued, still processing the magnitude of Joe's final gift. "Business, property, even his house on Oak Street. 3 bedrooms, fenced yard, enough space for a real family." The implications hung in the air between them, obvious and terrifying and full of promise. "Is that what we are now?" Christine asked, her voice carrying hope mixed with uncertainty. "A real family?" Trevor looked at this woman who had chosen to fight beside him, who had risked everything to save his daughter, who had found the courage to trust again despite losing everything that mattered to her. "If you want it to be," he said simply, meaning it more than any words he'd ever spoken. "Even knowing my past? Even knowing what I've done?" Christine's question carried the weight of someone who'd spent years believing she didn't deserve happiness. "Because of your past. Because it made you strong enough to survive, strong enough to fight for people you barely knew." Zoe tugged on Trevor's sleeve with the persistence that only children possessed. "Daddy, can Christine live with us? Like, officially?" The question was asked with 8-year-old directness, cutting through adult complications with the clarity of innocent logic. "That's up to Christine, sweetheart," Trevor replied, though his eyes never left Christine's face. "I'd love that," Christine said, her voice thick with emotions she'd thought were dead and buried. "More than anything." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of promises and possibilities, of second chances and new beginnings built from the ashes of old endings. 1 year later, Miller and Associates' garage hummed with activity that would have made Joe Miller proud. The business had expanded, adding 2 more mechanics and a customer service area that doubled as a community gathering space. Trevor had kept Joe's name on the sign as a permanent reminder of the man who'd given him not just a job, but a chance to build something meaningful. And Persephone learned that even in the darkest places, spring always returns. Christine finished reading to a circle of 12 children gathered in the garage's customer lounge. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who'd found her purpose in teaching others about resilience and hope. "Miss Christine," 9-year-old Sophia raised her hand. "Was Persephone scared in the underworld?" "Very scared, but she learned that being scared doesn't mean being weak," Christine replied, her eyes finding Trevor's across the garage bay where he was training Marcus Wilson, Joe Miller's nephew, who'd become head mechanic 6 months earlier. "Sometimes brave people get scared too, but they do the right thing anyway." Zoe, now 9 years old and official assistant storyteller, nodded solemnly. "Because family is worth fighting for," she added, her words carrying wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. The other children nodded in agreement, accepting this truth with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. After story time ended and the families dispersed into their Saturday afternoon routines, Trevor and Christine cleaned up, while Max, their golden retriever rescue, played in the fenced yard behind the garage. Good crowd today," Trevor observed, watching through the window as neighborhood children took turns throwing tennis balls for the dog who'd become the unofficial mascot of Miller and Associates. "Growing every week. I think we need a bigger space for the story programs." Christine smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face in ways that still took Trevor's breath away. "Actually," Trevor said, pulling out architectural drawings he'd been working on for months, "I've been planning something." Christine studied the plans, her eyes widening as she realized the scope of what he was proposing. "A community center?" she asked, her voice carrying wonder at the possibility. "Built where the old mill burned down. Turn a place of destruction into something constructive." The plans showed garage expansion, customer service areas, a real children's library, community meeting spaces, even a small apartment above the main building. "It's Joe's idea, really," Trevor explained. Found his notes after the funeral. He'd been planning expansion for years, dreaming about ways to give back to the community that had supported his business. That evening, they drove to Hillcrest Cemetery for their weekly visit, a ritual that had developed naturally over the months of healing and building. 2 graves side by side, Joe Miller's headstone still relatively new, Emma Chen's marker transferred from Seattle at Christine's request. "Hi, Uncle Joe," Zoe said, placing fresh flowers with the solemnity of someone who understood the importance of remembering. "Business is really good. Daddy hired Marcus and 2 more mechanics, and Christine's library program has 20 kids now." She paused, then continued with the kind of announcement that only 9-year-olds could make with complete confidence. "And guess what? They're getting married next month. I'm going to be the flower girl, and Christine is going to officially be my mom." The joy in her voice carried across the cemetery like music, a sound that spoke of healing and hope, and families built from choice rather than chance. "And hi, Emma," Zoe continued, placing a second bouquet with careful precision. "Christine shows me pictures of you sometimes. You were really pretty, and you loved dinosaurs just like I love mythology. I think we would have been best friends." Christine wiped away tears that came easier now, no longer fighting emotions that had taken so long to surface after years of survival mode. The wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon in Cedar Falls Community Park, surrounded by everyone who had helped them build their new life. Joe Miller's absence was felt keenly, but his presence seemed to linger in the warm autumn air and the faces of friends who'd gathered to celebrate love born from loss and strengthened by choice. Zoe walked down the aisle carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, her dress a miniature version of Christine's simple white gown. Behind her, Christine moved with quiet grace, her eyes focused on Trevor standing at the makeshift altar under oak trees that had witnessed 100 years of celebrations and sorrows. Marshall Johnson, who had become an unlikely friend, performed the ceremony with dignity that spoke of someone who understood the significance of new beginnings. "Do you, Trevor Hayes, take Christine Chen to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" The traditional words carried weight that went far beyond legal ceremony, encompassing promises that had already been tested by fire and found unbreakable "I do," Trevor replied, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd with absolute certainty. The same certainty filled Christine's voice when she made her own vows, promising to love and cherish the man who had risked everything to save her and the daughter who had taught her to hope again. 6 months later, Trevor stood in the doorway of the nursery they'd added to Joe's house on Oak Street, watching Christine rock their newborn son to sleep, little Samuel Miller Hayes, named for Christine's lost daughter's favorite stuffed animal and the man who'd given them all a second chance, slept peacefully in his mother's arms, unaware that his very existence was a miracle born from love that had survived the worst the world could offer. "He looks like you," Christine whispered, her voice soft with wonder at this new life they'd created together. "But he has your stubborn streak," Trevor replied, settling into the rocking chair beside her. Through the window, they could see Zoe playing in the backyard with Max, her laughter carrying through the evening air like a promise that some stories really did have happy endings. "Any regrets?" Christine asked, the question that had become their evening ritual, a way of checking in with each other and making sure that happiness was real and sustainable. "About what?" Trevor asked, though he already knew the answer. "About choosing ordinary life. Suburban house, family dinners, PTA meetings, soccer practices." Trevor looked around the nursery they'd painted together, filled with stuffed animals and picture books, and all the ordinary magic that made up a family home. "After years of hiding and months of violence, ordinary is extraordinary," he said, meaning every word. "Even when it includes a 9-year-old who thinks she's the boss of everyone." "Especially then," Trevor replied, listening to Zoe's voice drifting through the window as she explained to Max why dogs couldn't eat ice cream for dinner. Some families were born, others were forged through crisis, tempered by loss, and strengthened by choosing each other every ordinary day. In the nursery of their home in Cedar Falls, surrounded by the quiet sounds of evening settling over their neighborhood, Trevor Hayes understood that he'd found something rarer than safety or happiness. He'd found home, real, permanent, unshakable home, built from broken pieces and held together by the daily choice to love the people who made ordinary moments feel like magic.